Welcome to The Alignment Show, featuring conversations with folks who have taken steps to identify their highest values and align their lives around them. Time on this earth is not unlimited, and you may be seeking to make sure you spend your time on things that matter to you. These conversations will encourage you and support you in doing so. Now, let's meet this week's guest on The Alignment Show. And a good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you once again for joining us here on The Alignment Show. We have a repeat guest today who has, I would guess you would say, a little different kind of message. But we'll get into that in just a moment. But first, let's just remind you about our sponsors. We have a couple of them who've been regulars with us for a while. The first is SalesWise Live. Regular listeners already know about this, but you may be joining us for the first time. And when you hear sales, you may immediately think of something sleazy or manipulative. This is exactly the opposite of that. Benjamin Franklin once said you can do well by doing good. And that's sort of the basis for SalesWise. It's built on the idea that and I don't know where it originated, but I know Bob Berg uses this all the time. All other things being equal, we tend to do business with people we know, like, and trust. And that means building genuine relationships. And so there's a lot in SalesWise about how to do that. And because of that, it is a very useful program for lots of people who are not in commission sales. It's really about being an effective human being. So I would encourage you to check out donking.com. This is especially for the audio listeners. If you're on video, we've got a crawl going across the bottom. donking.com, that's DONNKING.com/SalesWise. And that will take you to information about the program. No obligation, nothing pressured is going to come out of this. Again, that's the opposite of what they do. But it's something that you owe it to yourself to check out. Also sponsoring the show is Don King, sort of, specifically my books. I am primarily a writer and for the last few years an author. So I've got 2 books out already in the Sparklight Chronicles series, which you can learn about at donking.com/books. Again, that's Don with a double N. And those 2 books are the first in the Sparklight Chronicles. As more books are published, you can learn more about it at that same link. There are 2 others in that series that are in progress. But before they come out, there's a new one that should be available at least for pre-order in about 5 or 6 weeks. It's called Creating While Caring. That one is a straight nonfiction book. The other books are business parables. And say a word about that. Business parables are works that use fiction stories, and we intend for them to be good stories. That is, the stories would stand on their own. But those stories teach nonfiction principles. So technically nonfiction books. Caring or Creating While Caring is straight nonfiction. It's a how-to book. It's how to keep creating while you are a caregiver. 53 million unpaid caregivers in the United States alone. And a lot of those folks had careers that were already established. Writers, artists, painters, actors, all kinds of creative careers out there. And then when you find yourself with responsibility for caring for someone, the usual advice just no longer applies. Things like, block out 2 hours on your calendar and tell your family not to disturb you. That just doesn't work. So Creating While Caring is designed to support people in that situation. Now you may think, well, that doesn't apply to me. I'll bet you know somebody that it applies to. I think the population of this country right now is right around 400 million. 53 million, that's over 10%. There are a lot of folks out there in this situation. So check out donking.com/books books. As soon as that new book is published, it will show up there. With that, let's go ahead and introduce our guest today. He has been on the show before. Dan Janal is someone I have gotten to know through the Go Giver community, the community that is centered around Bob Berg and John David Mann's books on the Go Giver. And truly, Dan is a Go Giver. He is an accomplished writer, ghostwriter, book coach, long time in the industry. He has seen many changes, but that's not why he's here with us today. He had a situation to come up in his life, and he realized that he could use his skills as a writer to help other people facing similar situations. Now, you're going to learn about what was going on with Dan, and so I'm not going to spend any more time setting that up. Let's just go ahead and bring on, once again, Dan Janal. Virtual Don, take it away. So we're happy once again here on the Alignment Show to have with us again Dan Janal. The last time Dan was with us, we were talking more about how he got involved in writing and all the stuff that he does. But we've got a little bit different topic today, Dan. I might wonder if I can just turn to you to tell the audience a little bit about what's bringing us together this time.
Oh, sure, Don. Thanks for having me. And I'm in a much better place now than I was on September a year ago, because I was in my doctor's office and I felt I was perfectly fine. I have no symptoms. I was going to Pilates 3 or 4 times a week. I was lifting weights. I was walking. I felt fine, but my doctor looked at my blood work and he thought differently. He thought I actually had cancer, and he sent me through a bunch of tests that actually proved that I did. And I was more stunned than anyone you can imagine to find out that outwardly I was healthy and happy and perfectly symptom-free, but my blood work was like literally off the chart. I learned later that 85% of my bone marrow was compromised by cancer. And
wow.
If they didn't start treatment immediately, I'd probably be dead within 2 months. That's how advanced the cancer was. Fortunately, I responded very quickly to the chemo treatments and the meds. And 4 to 5 months later, I had what they call a partial response and then a complete response. So the cancer is not out of my body. It'll never be out of my body, but they can treat it. And I think that's the important thing I learned from my lesson, because when a doctor says you have cancer, you immediately say, that's a death sentence. Oh my God. And you don't hear anything else that they say. And you just think, oh, how much time do I have left? What do I have to do? What do I have to clear up? And you don't hear them say, but it's treatable.
And they did say that.
It. And that's when I realized that cancer is not a death sentence for many people, but instead, cancer is a chronic condition. And if you learn nothing else from this show or from my book, that's the key message of hope to take away. Because lots of people, virtually everyone, has a chronic condition: diabetes, arthritis, fibromyalgia, fill in the blank. I'm sure anyone listening to this program is saying, yeah, I got, and they're filling in, and they deal with it, and they live with it, and they take meds, they do exercises, they eat well, they do things to minimize the pain, extend their life, and lead a happy and healthy life. And I want to leave that message with everyone who gets a cancer diagnosis, because yes, some people, it's tragic and it's horrible, and that's what stopped me from writing the book for a long time, because I feel for the people who do get terminal cases and don't recover. But early in my diagnosis, a friend turned me onto a book called Cured, which is a book by a Harvard doctor where he wrote about spontaneous remission from all sorts of horrible diseases across the board, who received total clarity and health using a number of treatments, whether it be mind-body treatments, whether it be health treatments like eating better, exercising, diet and exercise, or removing stress, or improving their immune system, or finding strength in community, or religion, or purpose, or changing their environment. Any of those things, there are probably a few more in the book that I didn't mention, but any of those things have a tremendous effect on helping people have hope to get out of this negative cycle that cancer equals death. This book changed my life. It really is good, because I read a chapter in the book and I said, God wants me to live. And I'm not a particularly religious person. I wouldn't believe the universe or the aura or the cosmos or whatever, put in the word you want. But that gave me the strength to realize that, I'm going to get through this, and I'm being saved, and I'm being saved for a purpose. And I had to struggle, like, what is my purpose? And as you said in the green room, I'm a writer and I'm a speaker. I've written more than a dozen books. I've been translated to 6 languages. I've spoken everywhere from Beijing to Budapest, all across the United States and Canada, mostly on marketing issues and things like that. Nothing spiritual, nothing health-wise, although I want to start doing that. But I feel like, is that the right medium? Is that the right thing that I should be doing? Is there something else? Is there another way to get the message out? Because what I realized is that I have learned a couple of important things here from getting this diagnosis. I don't even use that word. I hate using that C word. We don't even want to call it the C word, because what you focus on is what you receive. I just want to call it the diagnosis. I want to be as far away from that word as possible, because I don't want to focus on it at all. I had a diagnosis. I recovered from the diagnosis. I still have the diagnosis. I'm doing treatments to prevent it from recurring and to keep it under control. I'm taking it seriously, but it's not my life. I am not focused on that. I'm focused on living a normal life. And I think that's the kind of message I want to share with people, that first of all, cancer is not a death sentence. It's a chronic condition. Second, everyone has something, and we're all dealing with it, even if you can't see it. So be kind. So I see people park in the handicap spot and they look perfectly fine. Well, they could be having absolutely horrible things going on inside their body that you wouldn't even notice. So be kind to everyone. And the third thing is that it can always be worse. I joined a support group for people who have what I have. Well, I was lucky. I was diagnosed early. I had no outward symptoms. There are people who only discover this after they've broken a bone in their back or their spine is cracked and they can't walk anymore. And they have trouble getting out of bed. I said, oh my God. I go to the Mayo Clinic. That's where I get treated. And, people go to the Mayo Clinic, they're there for a reason. And, I've seen people there without legs and wheelchairs. Say, holy cow, it can be a lot worse. So be grateful. That's the message. Be grateful for where you are, because it can always be worse. So treat yourself well and be kind to others. And the final thing, of course, is that, you're being saved for a reason. You're alive for a reason. What is that reason? How can you help people? And that's why I'm writing this book and I'm doing these podcasts, is to give people hope and inspiration that even though they do have this diagnosis, it's not the end of the world. And I want to help people and inspire people and be of service to people. I mean, I have no business plan for this book. It's a horrible thing to say. I have no idea where this is going to go. But I also know that this is a message I have to get out there to help people, because I can be of service to them.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot to unpack here. So let's, for one thing, I want to go ahead and get the name of your website out there. It'll be up by the time that this episode comes out. And the title of the book, the name of the website's the same, and the important concepts there, because you said you don't like to say the C word. It's built into this, but it's because we're talking about reframing cancer. So reframingcancer.com. We want to say it out loud for folks who are with us just audio only. But if you're on video, you can see the crawl down there at the bottom, reframingcancer.com. Want to emphasize that from my perspective on the outside of this particular diagnosis, I see people going to one extreme or the other. You've talked about one extreme. That is, I hear the C word, it's a death sentence. But then people will go to the other extreme and think, I'm just not going to think about it. It's almost like toxic positivity. And that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about a realistic reframing. It is not dying with cancer, it's living with cancer. I know part of your hesitation in writing the book was, well, there are people out there who get this diagnosis and a month later they are gone. And it's for them, there's still a reframing, because you may only have a month left, But I've heard from some folks. Again, a reminder for our regular listeners: part of what I do is pastoring a church, and I've been with people who knew that they had a limited time, and not for all of them, but for a lot of them, it was, well, we all have limited time. My difference is I have some idea when the expiration date is, and I'm going to make use of that time. So there's a lot of reframing that could be involved here. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of nurses during my treatments. You come in and they give you injections and you chat and they're friendly and they know a lot. I mean, nurses are an invaluable resource and they have time to spend with you as well. And I asked them, do people who have a positive attitude have a better outcomes than people who have a negative attitude? And they all said, without a doubt. And in fact, it was kind of interesting. I asked some nurses, like, why are you in the cancer ward? Isn't this a horrible place to be? I mean, everyone here is going to die. This is when I first got my diagnosis. And they said, oh, no, 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 no. People who come here are great because they want to live. They have a positive attitude. They want to live. So one nurse said, I was in the ER and people there want to die. They come in, they're suicides, or they're upset when you save them, or they're drug addicts and they're really just killing themselves every day with their drugs. Said people here want to live. It's very uplifting. And I spoke to another nurse and she said, I was in pediatrics and the kids hate us because we give them shots and they hate shots. We come here, we're giving people injections and they're saying, you're saving my life by doing this. So in some ways, we're inspiring nurses as well. But again, the positive outlook is good. And like you said, we're not denying. I'm not denying that it's there. In fact, you can't spell denial without Daniel, which is my first name. And I was writing a little story about that. And I said, no, I'm really not in denial, although I'm minimizing it. I am lessening the impact of it. It is not the center of my life. Granted, it takes me a day out of my week to go down to Mayo and get my injections and do that treatment, but I've reframed that as well. It's like a 90-minute drive. And at first I listened to Tony Robbins tapes. I figured, like, if I have all this time to spend, why listen to politics or music or whatever on radio? I'll listen to something uplifting. So I had these old Tony Robbins tapes and he's great. And then I started listening to Joel Osteen, who's, he's a, televangelist preacher, but he's really a very good inspirational speaker. I forget what your religion is or whatever. He's just very motivational, very inspirational, very uplifting. And I listened to 2 or 3 of his episodes driving down there and 2 or 3 of his episodes driving back up. And I tell you, it's made a big difference because he's a very positive outlook, very, very positive things. He says, the right people come into your life at the right time for the right meaning. And I tell you, you're in my life right now for the right purpose. I can tell you story after story of people who've come back into my life after like 20, 30, 40 years of not seeing each other, and then we hook up for some odd reason, and we start again, and they had a cancer journey, and it's just amazing that the right people do come into your life at the right time. I mean, my friend who told me about the Cured book, was a business associate of mine, and we stayed in touch every couple of months or so and get together, and he knew about this book. I mean, just odd coincidence, but this book changed my life. It gave me the hope and inspiration that I can really make it, that this thing can be cured. So it's just amazing the synchronicity of the people who can help you, who are in your community, or who just come out of the woodwork that can be inspirational or can help you. I've story after story about that. I mean, one woman I was in summer camp with, 50 years ago, we sort of hooked up again, maybe 10 years ago. We chat once or twice a year. She's married to a doctor. I said, what kind of doctor? And she said, oh, the kind of doctor you don't want to see. He's a cancer doctor. Well, that was 10 years ago. Went in one ear, out the other ear. Couldn't have cared less because we're talking about old times and the people we knew back at summer camp. Well, I get this diagnosis and I talk to her, and it turns out that her husband is not just a doctor. He's a researcher. He's the head researcher for my kind of cancer at a major drug company that we've all heard of. I mean,
Wow.
You can't make this stuff up. And of course,
Yeah.
unfortunately, she had breast cancer when she was in her 20s. So she told me about her story. And, when she was in her 20s, that was like 30 years ago. Treatments were were, I mean, sure, treatments are horrible now. They were really horrible then. And she helped me get through the initial months of dealing with the things that I had to go through. So the right people come into your life at the right time. I mean, there's an amazing synchronicity that goes on in the world that simply defies logic.
Yeah, yeah. It's like you say, because I know as a writer, fiction, you have to make it believable. This wouldn't work in fiction because people would say that could never happen. Happens like this all the time in real life. I'm going to trot down a quick little side path here because every once in a while people will theologically they'll get in. Well, God did this, et cetera, et cetera. God caused the cancer. That's not really theologically sound. You could turn to the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. It's not that God made his brothers sell him into slavery, but since they did that, God was able to use it. And so, again, without digging into the theology a whole lot, this is not you looking at it and saying, boy, I'm glad that I got cancer, but since I did, and I'm a writer and I know how to tell stories, I know how to not only give useful information, but set it in an effective emotional context to give realistic hope that this is an opportunity for me to take, as Joseph said to his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're able to do good out of what has happened with you. Does that seem like a fair statement?
Yeah, exactly. And as I was, writing the book or thinking about writing the book, and believe me, I had a lot of mental hangups about writing the book as well, because, who am I to tell people anything? I'm not a
Yeah.
doctor. And as you said, as we all know, there are some people who get stage 4 pancreatic cancer diagnoses, and there's no cure. They're just, it's unfortunate. And granted, 10 years ago, I'd be dead. There would be no cure. But science has come a long way in 10 years to the point now where Mayo had a webinar, and they basically said that the drugs and the treatments now, just about everyone who has my diagnosis is going to be stabilized and will deal with this and will have a fairly decent lifespan, which is really great. And I'm sure that's happening with other cancers as well. And yet there's still other cancers that they're still at the beginning stages. So I really wanted to honor the people and the people's families of the deceased who didn't make it. And I'll be very respectful of that. And then I realized that, well, I went to some seminars and heard other people speaking of who write memoirs. They said, your purpose is to help other people get hope and inspiration. And if there's some people who say, well, he's the lucky one, my husband died, so fuck him. Can I say that? I'm sorry.
Sure, why
If
not?
you're editing this,
It's appropriate.
screw him. There's no hope for those kinds of people. For the people who want hope and inspiration, they're going to be looking for hope and inspiration. And that's why I'm writing the book. And I think one of the key things about writing a book like this is that when you get your diagnosis, you don't want to read a 40,000 word dense book full of words. You want bite-sized chunk things. You want to look at a 120-page book and see 120 inspirational ideas or actionable ideas that can move you to the next level. And that's why I'm writing it. So they're very short essays, and each essay, talks about where I've been and what I learned from this. And then I ask, I turn the tables. I have a question for consideration. That's what I'm framing it now. It may change to something else more friendly. But right now, it's like questions for consideration. Say like, what would you like to have happened in this situation? Or what would you have done if this situation? Or what exercises would you do that you would do because it will help extend your life?
Mhm.
And then people can fill it in. So it becomes a journal for them. So it's not just my story. And my story is interesting to a point, but frankly, your story is much more interesting to you.
Yes,
So
yes.
I need to make my story their story so they can see themselves in my story and say, yeah, that happened to me, or I can see that happening to me. This is how Dan overcame it, but Dan is not me. How would I overcome this? Like Dan started eating lots of salads to avoid, to build up his immune system. But I hate vegetables. What can I do? Well, what kind of vegetables do you like to eat? So don't eat beets, don't eat, Brussels sprouts, but do you like carrots? Do you like celery? Anything is good. I'm reframing exercise. I'm reframing exercise. Everyone, no one likes to exercise, but remember when you were a little kid in elementary school and you couldn't wait for recess? You know,
Yeah.
yay, the bell rang. Let's go out and play recess. We're going to play tag. We're going to do whatever. No one kept score. No one cared. You just ran around and had freedom. Then you went to middle school and suddenly you were in a uniform and they kept score. And suddenly there were good kids who were like really good athletes, and there were the kids like me who were like picked last, and it was embarrassing. And we hated the idea of exercise and gym. And what do? We say, oh, go to the gym and exercise. Well, let's reframe that. Let's have recess. Because the whole point of exercise is to move. And cancer doesn't care if you're lifting 80-pound weights or if you're just doing a push-up or just walking. And frankly, a lot of the things I'm seeing for the Harvard Medical School about dealing with these issues is just move, just walk. No one cares about 10,000 steps. Just walk, just move. You know, I was with my doctor the other day, and she was complimenting me. I go to Pilates 3 or 4 times a week. I walk, I lift weights. And she said, some of my patients, their idea of exercise is getting up from the bed and going to the bathroom and going back to bed. I was like, oh my God. And that goes back to one of my principles of like, it can always be worse.
Yes.
There are people who's like, that's all they can do. So I believe, unfortunately, and all the science proves this, that today is the best day of your life. You know, tomorrow, you're not going to be any feeling better than you are today because your muscle mass decreases. I mean, if you're over 35, it's just a fact of life. So anything you can do to increase and improve your muscle mass is going to be good. So if you walk, that's going to be good. You're going to be staving off the inevitable decline. In fact, you know, when I was younger, I used to lift 20-pound dumbbells. And then I stopped doing it because, hey, you know, I'm human. I have no self-control. And I stopped doing it. Then I got this diagnosis and I realized that I had to start doing weight-bearing exercises. So I picked up the 20-pound dumbbells and I couldn't. They were just way too heavy. So I picked up 15-pounders and I could do that. So I was, you know, doing curls and things and going up and down and doing the 15-pounders. And like eventually my right arm said, like, I can do more. So I picked up the 20-pounder and I could do more. And this is proven by science as well. You can actually, at any age, improve your muscle mass. So a couple of months ago, my wife and I were driving a long drive, and we stopped at this hotel. It was like after a 10, 12-hour drive, and I was feeling kind of antsy and out of sorts. I said, I'm going to go to the weight room and just lift some weights for a couple of minutes and, you know, get rid of this tension. So I went to the weight rack, and I picked up these weights, and I started lifting them and doing the curls and everything. And I said, you know, they feel a little bit heavier than normal. But that's probably because we were sitting in a car for 10 hours and I'm just feeling kind of antsy. And I when I was done with my set, I put them back. They were 30-pounders. I was actually much heavier than I was ever used to, but I could do it. And it only goes to show that if you don't do it, you'll lose it. But if you do it, you can actually improve. And every day before I get out of bed, I do some exercises to loosen up because I know if I don't do it, I'm going to be stiff for the rest of the day. So even if it's just simple, like doing like the YMCA kind of exercise, like moving your arms up here and doing goal posts and whatever, it loosens your upper back. And you know, we call them exercises, but you can also call it physical therapy because that's where I learned it. And I think that's another thing about reframing. You know, when you go to PT, you're paying for it. And you do it because you're paying for it.
Yeah.
Well, if you
and
go
it's
to the gym, it's
because
like it's too easy to stop doing something. But if you're
yeah.
paying for it in physical therapy, you do it.
Well, and it's interesting because people, you know, it's almost a truism in our culture that people will pay for gym memberships and not use them, but they're paying for PT and they'll do it because they're paying for it. You know, it's just a little different mindset. So much of what you're dealing with is mindset. Let me just real quick to give folks a feel for this. Let's do a bit of a timeline. You said September, but was that September 2023, 2024?
Have to go back in my timeline. So we're in February of 25.
Yeah.
24 was a full year of going to Mayo. So it was the previous year is 23. So it was September of 23 that I got all these diagnoses, went to all these tests, and you know, they inject this this needle into your spine and extract fluid from your spine. They put this nuclear medicine in you in a room with like radiation shields to find stuff. I mean, it's
Oh, yeah,
intense. It's
yeah,
really intense. And I hate to think of the thank God I'm over 65 because all covered by Medicare.
yeah.
But if I were 55, I'd be dead and broke. So, if
Interesting.
people complain about the medical system, but if you're over 65, it really does work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think we said, I believe I heard you say that it really took some time for you to get past that first reaction and to begin thinking of it as I'm living with cancer as opposed to dying with cancer. So you went in September. Let's establish this. You weren't there. You've already said this. We want to be clear. You weren't there because you had symptoms. You were just there for an annual checkup or something, correct?
Right, right.
And so, folks, don't neglect those annual checkups. That's one of the lessons to come out of this. Okay.
Oh yeah. Even if you feel fine, and I felt fine.
Yeah, yeah. But September 2023, you get the diagnosis. How long did it take before you began to get the glimmer that, this I could be living with this. I could change the way I'm thinking about it. Give us a little bit of that timeline.
Sure. Two things happened both in January. Like my doctors basically said, you have cancer, we can deal with it. And after we get you stabilized, we'll give you a bone marrow transplant, which is frankly is a fate worse than death. I mean, they just fill you up with chemo, they knock out your entire immune system, and then they slowly reintroduce all those childhood vaccines because you have no immunity to anything. You can get polio. And they never really knock out the cancer either because it never goes away, at least this kind of cancer. So that did not seem like a good option for me. So I was pretty depressed. But in January, two things happened. Mayo had a webinar for people with my condition. And one of the first things the doctor said was that most people respond positively to the treatments. My doctors never said that, or if they did, I didn't hear it because I heard cancer equals death. So they
Mm,
very well might have said that, but it went in one ear and out the other because of the way that doctors talk about telling people about the diagnosis. And we'll go into that in a second because I reframed that as well.
mhm.
The second thing that happened is I was speaking to my cousin and I told him about my diagnosis. And he said, "Oh, my wife has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma." And I said, "Really? I didn't know that. When did that happen?" We're not particularly close. We talk once or twice a year, whatever. I figured it was something new.
Mhm.
He said, "Oh, 16 years ago." I said, 16 years ago? He said, "Yeah, it's cancer, but it's more like a chronic condition."
Mm.
And that's when the light bulb went off. And I said, that's what I have. I have a chronic condition. It'll never go away. I did nothing to get this. There's nothing I could have done to prevent this. And it's going to be with me for the rest of my life. But I have a chronic condition and I can deal with it because the meds and the treatments and the science has improved to a point where I can be saved, where 10 years ago I'd be dead.
Mhm.
And I have a friend whose wife died from this 10 years ago, and it was a painful death. And that was my first frame of reference. Oh my God, I know someone who died from this, and it was not pretty. And oh my God.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot that doctors can do when they tell people about the diagnosis. Because right now it's like, we looked at you have cancer. That's it. In fact, the first doctor, not my Mayo doctor, the first doctor who told me about this, her exact words were, "You were dealt a bad hand. You
Mm.
have cancer, and not only do you have cancer, but you have the most aggressive form of that cancer." So what was I
Mm.
supposed to do? You think, oh my God, I'm going to die. How much time do I have left? You go through the whole Kubler-Ross thing of, negotiating with God and,
Yeah.
and all that and denial and all that. You don't hear anything else that they say. Wouldn't it be so much better if they had said something like this? Hey, Dan, we got your lab work back. We looked at your blood work. And, frankly, there are some things here that we're very concerned about. But we have treatments for it. we're going to put you on this this chemo, and we're going to do this for you and that for you. And we think we can get it under control in about 4 to 6 months or so. And if so, here's the next thing that we will do. And basically, we think that we can manage all of this. It's like, phew, okay, great. That's wonderful, doc. He said, oh, and by the way, if you're curious, this is in the category of diseases that we call cancer. Cancer? You mean I have cancer? Yeah, yeah, but we have control over it. If they framed it something like that, and I'm no communications expert, but it seems to me that if you follow what I just said, then the patient is more likely to accept the diagnosis, deal with the treatment, understand what's going on, and walk out of there pretty much in control of their lives, as opposed to, oh my God, cancer equals death, which is the way most people would have interpreted it. What do you
Yeah,
think?
yeah. Well, so, one of the things that strikes me about it in just basic business, in sales in particular, there's an approach that's called deductive and there's inductive, and deductive would be putting the thesis out there first. Salespeople know not to do this. You don't go to somebody and say, I'd like to talk to you today about life insurance, because that just makes the prospect turn off. Now, we're not talking about manipulating people. We always emphasize that in the Go Giver community. It's not about manipulating people. It is about making sure that they hear what you have to say. And so if you start with a story of somebody who I had a student in one of my speech classes, a 35-year-old woman who canceled her life insurance because she was in school, figured she could pick it up later. Longer story, very short, she wound up suddenly dying unexpectedly and leaving her family with a big funeral bill. You tell that story first, and then you can say, maybe we ought to talk about life insurance. Doesn't mean you're going to make a sale, but it makes sure that you're heard. And so what I hear you talk about with the doctor here is just making sure that the patient hears the realistic assessment here. I think sometimes they worry about holding out false hope, but we need to hold out realistic hope. So that's one thing that occurs to me just from a communication standpoint. Now, as you develop with that through January, continuing the coming year, you still wrestled with, well, I don't know if I want to write a book about this. Part of it being, for lack of a better term, imposter syndrome, and realistically, in a sense, because I'm not a doctor, why should I write about this? But we don't write books these days, especially, I would contend, this is something that's changing in writing. If people just want information, there's this little thing called the internet, and especially when you add AI into it, if they just want information, they can get that without having to buy a book. They buy the books because they're looking for hope. And yes, they want solid information in that book, but they want more than just information. Now, the other thing is they want more than just your story, because while that might be interesting, it's not very useful to me. When you put those two things together, you get something that they can't just get off the internet. And it's also something that is useful to them. Sounds like to me that's kind of what you're trying to pull together, to use your experience to both educate and inspire. Am I putting it inaccurately?
No, that's exactly right. In fact, I was at a seminar the other day and I learned a new term. It's called memoir plus.
Ah.
And it's the idea that it's not just your story, it's your story plus something additional that gives it more weight and more meaning and more bearing to people. And that's why I end each of my stories with questions for consideration. So they can use my story and my lesson and turn it into their life. So I might say that I like to do Pilates for my recess, not for my exercise, but I do Pilates and I walk, and that's what I do. And you're only going to do what you like to do. You're not going to do what you don't like to do.
Yeah.
So my question for consideration was, what form of movement, notice I didn't use the word exercise, what form of movement do you like to do that you would do to help you live a more productive or a healthier lifestyle? And then they can say that they can walk or climb the stairs or
Mhm.
garden or walk the dog. I spoke to a guy earlier today. He walks, he has another condition that's and is in really bad shape, but he walks his dog 3 miles a day. 3 miles is a great,
Yeah.
that's a lot to walk, especially if you have if you're on a bad side of a condition. So I gave him a lot of credit because that's what he can do, and
Mhm.
that's wonderful. And there are all sorts of movement things. If you can't do a push-up on the floor, you can do a push-up against the wall at any kind of angle that works for your body. It's all good because it moves things around. So keep on moving and you'll be fine. And I think that's the purpose of those questions for consideration that make the book their own so that people can do what they can do at their own level. Because I said, everyone has something and it can always be worse. And you can do whatever you can do. Like what I can do, you may not be able to do. What you can do, I may not be able to do. But doing something is going to be better than doing nothing.
Mhm.
Cutting out alcohol, cutting out processed foods, processed meats. If it's in a box, I generally don't eat it. They say, look at the ingredients, and if you can't pronounce it, don't eat it. Well, I've come
Mhm.
to the realization that anything in a box has things in it that I can't pronounce. So outside of my Cheerios, I don't eat anything from a box anymore. And granted, I backslide. I'm normal. I'll have a donut, even though I shouldn't. But what can you do? What kind of foods can you do? What kind of foods can you eliminate from your diet and be okay? What kind of vegetables can you eat that will not you'll be happy to eat? I mean, I realized years ago, so before I had my diagnosis, I'd be at the end of the workday, I'd sit in front of TV, I'd have a beer and chips. And I realized that was bad for me because it's beer and chips.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
nothing good that will come from that outside of just satisfaction of having beer and chips. Well, I realized after gaining a lot of weight that it wasn't the beer that I wanted, it was the carbonation. So
Mhm.
I'd have fizzy water. So I didn't have
Yeah.
the alcohol, I didn't have the calories. And the chips, it wasn't that I wanted the chips. I like crunchy. Crunchy is one of my food groups. So I'd
Yeah.
have carrots. And I didn't miss the salt, which is also not great for you. But I'd have my crunchy carrots, which is, I had my fizzy water. And I had the same positive feelings that I had when I
Mhm.
was having my beer and chips. So, again, reframing is so important. If you can just, look at the positive side of things. I mean, one of the great lessons I learned from Tony Robbins, like, a long time ago, is that there's no failure in life. It's like, what can I learn from this?
Mm.
Your
Yeah.
story about Joseph is almost indicative of this. It's like, what can I learn from this situation? And if you ask yourself that, then there is no failure. There's just, improvement, constant improvement. Another Tony thing that I liked is, don't ask why questions, ask how questions. So instead of
Yeah.
like, why am I so fat? Well, you're going to think of lots of good reasons. Well, I overeat, I have no self-control, I'm a pig. Well, that doesn't get you anywhere but a negative cycle. But you ask how, like, how can I lose weight? Say, well, I can avoid the beer, I can avoid the chips, and I can probably walk to the end of the block and back. That doesn't seem too far. And, I'll park at the end of the parking lot instead of close to the store. That might add a couple of steps. So if you ask those how kind of questions instead of the why questions, you'll probably wind up in a better place.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of cool that way when you can reframe things to be the positive. Then I think you're going to live a lot longer and have a life full of hope, happiness, and health, which is the subtitle of my book.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, those are great insights in and of themselves. It strikes me that in a way, what we're talking about is a shift of focus in the reframing. It's not what can I not do, but what can I do? And one of the
Good point.
advantages of that is if I focus on what can I do, I'm also taking back that sense of control. And I think a lot of the, when you're focusing on what I can't do anymore or, whatever, there's there is not only that as a challenge in and of itself, but adding to that the sense of loss of control. So that's a benefit of the reframing all by itself. I'll also mention we've heard people talk about just memoir in general. This goes beyond memoir, as you said, memoir plus. But memoir itself as a genre, it's not just what happened to someone. It's what did that someone do with what happened to them.
Hmm.
And so, yours is definitely memoir. What did you do with what happened to you? And then going beyond that with the plus to help them figure out, that is them, the reader, how can I apply this, the principles of it, the insights in my own life? So let's say once again, well, we've got the crawl going across here, reframingcancer.com. And that website then will be pointing to several resources, obviously the book. If people want to find you on LinkedIn, that's probably going to be a good place to find you. I want to ask you how, because so often on this show, we're talking about how people have changed their business to bring it into alignment with their values. It's not the only thing we talk about, but that happens a lot. And I'm curious, you have been very successful in the writing business for a long time. And I know part of that is, for lack of a better term, just drive, just keeping after it, Um, has this experience changed the way you're doing business? And in what way? Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm probably going to give you an answer that's totally unexpected because I have no business plan for this book. I have absolutely no idea how to monetize it, or even if I can monetize it, or if I should monetize it. I just want to get the message out there to help people. And unfortunately, I'm in a position in my life where um, I don't need the money. Money's always good, never can turn it down. But I've done well and things are good. So I'm just putting it out there and let the universe figure out what to do with it. I mean, if people want me to speak at their conferences, I'll certainly do that, and usually for a fee, or they buy books or something like that. So that's one way to monetize it. I've known other people who become cancer coaches. I haven't looked into that at all. I'm not quite sure what that entails, what kind of background you need for that. And but basically, my purpose in writing the book is God saved me for a reason. My skills are writing and speaking, and that's what I am going to focus on. And there's an old saying: if you do what you love, the money will come. And
Yeah.
we'll see what happens there. But I'm certainly not going to get on a plane and kill myself and do 30 or 40 speeches a year, because frankly, my immune system is not great. In fact, I got a notice for jury duty the other day, and I'd love to serve on the jury, but at the same time, I should not be in that kind of situation.
Right.
So you can get a medical exemption. So my doctor filled out a form for the medical exemption. Do I have it here? Yeah, I'll read it to you because it scared the hell out of me. I'm very patient here. I feel like, I got this under control. Life is good. I'm in remission, complete response. Said, please excuse the above named patient for federal jury duty due to, and this is what he wrote: the patient is receiving chemotherapy for cancer and is currently immunocompromised. He remains at risk for potentially life-threatening infections due to ongoing chemotherapy. And also, exposure to the public poses an increased risk for acquiring infections for an immunocompromised cancer patient. We're like, holy cow. Welcome back to reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
So yeah, I got to treat it seriously, but it's not my main focus.
right. And I
So I'm
mean,
not
a
going to get on a
reason.
plane, but I'll drive somewhere and speak to a group and help them. And at this point, the joy will be, or the payment will be in the joy that comes from giving people hope, so they can go out and inspire other people and give them hope. And
Oh,
in
yeah.
that way, we make the world a better place. I
Well,
think
and
that's
just
my contribution at this
just for
point.
that idea of reframing, I mean, a few weeks before this episode, folks watching this episode, the day that we recorded this, my podcast guest this morning was Lois Kramer, whom we both know, and Lois is expert in speaker marketing, and she's one of those people who has said, "I just don't want to get, I don't want to get on a plane anymore. I don't want to." And she's not doing it for health reasons. She said, COVID, as bad as it was, and we're not taking anything away from it, one of the things it did was to normalize people speaking via Zoom and that kind of thing. So I mean,
Yeah.
you can still do the professional speaking thing. Our friend Bob Berg doesn't want to get on planes anymore. And
Yeah.
you got to pay him a lot to get him to do it. Uh, so that's part of it. And let's see, there was something else that I was going to mention related to that. Um, it just left me, and that's okay. That's part of what doing this. Yes, we're recording it, but we're treating it like it's live. So we just do our thing here. So I'll come to this question, Dan. Usually there is some question that a guest will wish that I had asked that I didn't think to ask or didn't know enough to ask. Is there anything that you can find in the back of your mind there going, I wish Don had asked this? What would it be and what would your answer be?
Wow, we covered so much today, and a lot of the things we covered are going to be in the book. In fact, I'm still writing the book, so I know this is going to come out way before the book comes out. So, on my blog, on my website, I'm going to be posting updates, and these will be the chapters, and I'll put them on Substack, Substack as well, and maybe LinkedIn too. So it'll be a work in progress, and I'd love to get feedback from people and hear what they have to say as they help guide the book and guide the spirit of the book to see where the book will go to help the most people. I guess maybe not a question, but I think one of the interesting things that I learned from this was in my drive to Mayo every week, and it literally was every Monday for a year. I would drive to Mayo and I'd listen to the motivational, inspirational speeches on the radio. And it was an easy drive. You go through the Minneapolis metro and then you go to farmland, and it's a 90-mile drive. It takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. But it's peaceful. And there was a sense of peace and regularity and um, I'm blanking on the word, just harmony, or it just felt nice to just drive down there, park, and I tell you, the Mayo Clinic is an amazing place. The place is like a museum. You walk in there, and there's like marble floors. I think it's marble, such just normal stuff. It's high grade flooring, and there's this glass sculpture that's about as long as a football field hanging down from the ceiling. There's artwork everywhere. You feel like you're getting your injection inside a museum, an art museum. Very peaceful, very relaxing. There's a grand piano in the main area there, and there's usually a patient playing, and they're really good.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a delightful experience. And the other thing about Mayo, that you read the handbook, the patient handbook before you go there, and it says, "We will never end a meeting. You will end the meeting. We will stay for as long as you have questions." And I know a lot of people who are hearing that will saying, "Oh my God, if I'm lucky if I got 10 minutes with my doctor before they have to shove me out the door because they're paid by how many people they can see during the day."
Yeah.
Mayo is the gold standard, and I can't thank them enough for everything they've done for me. So I guess that would be how I would close this, that, there is a peace and a tranquility that can come when you accept this and look at the positive side and realize, what can I learn from this and how can I help other people with this situation? And I think that's the peaceful calmingness that I feel that is getting me through this, that I hope other people who are listening can help them get through their diagnosis as well.
Very good. In fact, that reminded me of what my other question was. I'm going to go ahead and ask it just for if there's a quick insight here. I'm curious if this experience that you've gone through, has it changed the way that you do what I might call your other business? I mean, you have writing projects other than this. You work with clients. Has it changed the pace? Has it changed the way you look at the work? How has it changed other things? Does that make sense?
Sure, it does. I'm not sure if I relate this to business so much, but in terms of what it's changed in me is more patience, being more forgiving of people, trying to look at their side of things. Uh, in fact, when I read the Cured book, they said, get rid of stress and tension. And I went to bed that night, and in the middle of the night, I had this epiphany, or this thing that just went through my brain of like unresolved issues with my father. And I didn't even know I had these issues. My father died when I was 12 or 13, 12 going on 13. And so very young, and he was young as well, he was 46. So there weren't really many issues, but I guess there was something deep down buried inside me that I didn't even realize. And I started looking at life through his eyes and his perspective, because my parents were divorced. And this is like, 1960, before everyone was getting divorced, where divorce was really, it's something you didn't talk about. Hard for people to believe that today. But back in the 50s and 60s, it was, it was a shame to get a divorce. It was like, oh, your kids are going to become juvenile delinquents if you get divorced. I mean,
Yeah.
stay together for the family. Don't, if you're divorced, it was the worst thing in the world is divorce. So my parents were divorced, and I started looking from his point of view. Like, we'd see him twice a month. He'd come to the house, and it's like, what was going through his mind of like, gee, he has to see his former wife. He only gets to see his kids twice a month. What is that like for a person? And come up to summer camp. All the parent couples came up on the 4th and 6th week when it was like parents' weekend. He would come up on the off week. When the divorced fathers, the 3 or 4 of them, would come up and almost be like, oh, I don't say outcasts, but there wasn't the same
Yeah.
sense of like, here are all the families together. Here's, and just trying to look at it from his point of view. And it's like, oh my God, that's really weird. He went through a lot of issues there. And as I was working through this exercise, and believe me, this is not an exercise I read in a book. This is just something that internalized within me. And when I realized that, I felt this giant weight just sort of lifting and getting off my chest and evaporating from my body, almost like an out of body experience. Like this is just lifting away, and I just felt lighter because of it. So I think removing stress is a big deal. But to get back to your question of like, how has it changed you? I think becoming more forgiving is a big thing. Realizing that other people are going through their own issues, and I need to look at it from their point of view, and to bite my tongue. So yeah, that has been a big change in my life, to be more accepting, more forgiving. Still working on gratitude. I'm not perfect. Still
Oh,
working
yeah.
on gratitude. I mean, people say, "Oh, it's a gift. You got cancer." You think all this. No, it sucks. Um, it's not a gift.
Yeah.
But
Can I
to
return it? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Good point.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I really appreciate you opening up for our audience. There's great insights here for living your values, to value your life. And I want to thank you personally for being here. I always enjoy talking with you, and thank you for enabling us to have a conversation that we can let our listeners join in on. So thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. I hope I've inspired some people to look at the brighter side of whatever issues they're dealing with, whether it be a diagnosis like I had. But again, everyone's dealing with something. And there's always, what can I learn from this? How can I benefit from this? What's the positive in this? And I think if you do that, then there are no downsides, and you'll move to a better experience if you just look at what is the positive side. And I think, frankly, that's the second thing I learned from this. Is I was not a very positive person. I was the kind of person who always see the good and the bad. I'm a marketer. We're trained to look at, what's wrong with this situation so we can build on it, or what's different about this situation so we can improve upon it. Now, I just look at the positive side of things. It's a lot better.
Yeah, it's a much more satisfying way to live, for sure.
It is. Thank you, Don.
Thank you. It was just so good to have that conversation with Dan. It's been a true personal pleasure to get to know him over the last. I have such a bad sense of time. I couldn't tell you for sure how long I've known Dan. Over a year, I think. And so, I've got some closing thoughts here. This has been a long episode, but I think there's a lot of meat here and worthwhile for people to dig through it. If I can indulge a little bit in some closing thoughts. It struck me, I was re-listening to this, that I knew Dan for months. without knowing he was facing this. And as I thought back over that timeline, September 2023, he was wrestling with that all this time. He is an inspiration for me on several levels, most of them long before I knew about his journey living with cancer. I mean, just his work with his writing, how he's done his business all these years. He's gone through several changes in the industry, and so that is a great inspiration to me. Um, and honestly, we've had conversations that weren't recorded. I've been privileged to spend hours just having conversations with Dan. So I'm glad to have been able to share this with you. And as we had our conversation, I think I saw him processing things that maybe he hadn't thought of before. It's one of the reasons for having conversations with people beyond just surface level. I want to give you a little bit of an update. Um, and I'm checking just in case he is able to join us live as we wrap things up here, which I don't think he's going to be able to. He has started his Substack since our interview. For those of you who were on with us video, I did have the link at one point. Want to say some things out loud for the people who are with us audio only. You can follow his Substack at Dan Janal, and that's spelled DanJanal, danjanal.substack.com. He is writing around the issues that he's covering in the book, getting pretty close to releasing the book. Also, since then, he has wrestled with and thought about how to monetize the book. And one of the things we always want to look at in terms of business here, it's not just about making the money. Quite honestly, there are easier ways to make money than writing or speaking. But he has, in thinking about this, realized ways to monetize the experience. And the reason that matters is it goes back to something I've mentioned several times on the show. Had a conversation with Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, at one point. At the time, he was the richest man in America, but he wasn't impressed with his own wealth. Didn't have a swimming pool, for example, because he said, all my vice presidents have swimming pools. I don't have one. I don't have time to swim. They just want to impress the neighbors, and I don't care about impressing the neighbors. He told me that he figured if they were making money, if he was making money, it meant that he was serving people. And if the income dropped, he took a step back to figure out where he was missing in that service. And so I'm glad to see Dan figuring out the monetization thing, because in doing so, he is serving people. It's an indication of helping people. I do want to show you the website, because at the time we recorded this back in February, he was still developing it. So let's see here if I can show a screen share. And there it is. Okay, so I would recommend you going and checking this out. There's the button for join the conversation. Get on that. Um, Scroll down through here. You can get the subscription. That's the best way to keep up with the launch of the book. And then I'm going to go on down through here. I love some of these articles, the unsung heroes, for example, of nursing. But down here at the bottom, you can find Substack. You can find him on Medium. You can find him on LinkedIn. And I really recommend you taking advantage of that. Let's see, what else do we want to share here? It occurred to me, and I think I did share the quote at one point, old dead Greek guy named Epictetus. He said, it's not what happens to you, but what you think about what happens to you that determines your experience. And that's a bit of Stoic wisdom that works in a lot of situations. At some point, we talked about how doctors might have more awareness of how they frame the diagnosis that they give you. I don't know if this is true or not. In my own observation, it seems like to me that doctors do seem, younger ones especially, seem to have more awareness of communication skills these days. And the reason I think it may make a difference as far as younger ones is it may indicate that they're more teaching about this kind of thing in medical school. I think some years ago they just said, medicine is a science, and so don't even worry about that. To me, they seem to be better about it. Dan talked about the memoir plus thing. And as we said there, memoir is not about what happened, it's about what you did with it. I posted a note during the broadcast to say this is why any of you who have thought about it should write your book. Now, again, if you weren't on with us on video, you didn't see that. So that's why I want to emphasize that. If you've been thinking about writing a book, it's not, you probably wrestle with imposter syndrome. Again, it's not what happened to you, it's what you did with it. Some of what Dan talked about really resonated with me right now. Again, we recorded that back in February. Went to the doctor myself just a day or two ago, got an update on my diabetes, which is not doing well. And so I am needing to make some changes. Lots of things I can't do anymore. And I have mobility issues. I can't hike in the Smokies anymore. And I live in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. I can focus on what I can't do. But Dan has reminded me that it's so much more effective to focus on what you can do. How can I deal with this? That is a great insight. I heard somebody years ago say one of the differences culturally, and I don't intend this to be putting any culture down, but there is a difference in how some cultures deal with adversity. There is a tendency in Western cultures, again, not to say it's superior, it's just a different approach. When bad things happen, we have a tendency to say, how can I deal with this? And in certain other cultures, the focus is on who did this to me. And therefore, the focus is on revenge. And that's just not as useful. It keeps you emotionally stirred. It keeps the conflict going because the other side, of course, can do the same thing. We will be linking in the show notes to the Lois Kramer episode. We talked about that. I will link to the Mayo Clinic. We'll link to the books that we've talked about. He mentioned the Cured book several times. I showed it on the screen, but again, for those of you who are on audio only, make sure that you are keeping track at confidencecultivators.com. That's where you can get the show notes, and we'll have links to all of these things. But again, I'm just very grateful to Dan for coming on and sharing his journey. A little reminder about our sponsors. Check out donking.com. That's DONN. donking.com/saleswise and donking.com/books. If you would like to provide some support here for the show, if you go to confidencecultivators.com, you can subscribe there for free. We want you to get those show notes, but you can also upgrade there for additional benefits. We are about to add additional benefits for paid subscribers, things like cheat sheets for action to take as a result of the episode, transcripts, that sort of thing. You can subscribe there if you would just like to make a one-time contribution. Buymeacoffee.com/Don King. That's one way, another way to support. Share this with a friend. You know somebody who needs this kind of encouragement, especially Dan's approach, ways to get the books that Dan mentioned, his upcoming book. I think it's a very useful book and very encouraging. And it doesn't just have to be about reframing cancer, reframing diabetes, reframing life's challenges. Finally, I work with a limited number of people to help them bring their book into publication. Now, there's a couple of slots available right now. Just said a limited number of people. So you can reach out to me at Don, DONN, at donking.com, and we'll talk about whether I can help you to serve the world in some unique way. That's a big part of what I do these days. Once again, thank you for being here with us on the Alignment Show. I hope that you will, in fact, find this to have been useful and encouraging and inspiring, and share it with somebody else. But in any case, my hope is that we can continue to help you to live your values so you can value your life. Not 100% sure what our next episode will be. Check the show notes. We'll have a link to it. But I will guarantee you we've got several conversations that we have recorded. All of them will support you in living a more valuable life. And we'll see you next time here on The Alignment Show. That's it for this week's episode of The Alignment Show. What has it inspired you to do in your own life? Whatever it is, take action now and take the first step. It will help you to talk with a friend about what you're thinking. Share confidencecultivators.com to spread the goodness. And remember to live your values and value your life. We will see you next week on The Alignment Show.